Welcome to the XY Advisor podcast, where it's our goal to help you become the best financial advisor possible and drive the positive evolution of financial advice. Hub24 is an ASX-listed company with over $10 billion funds under management and one of the fastest-growing platforms in the market. Neither a bank nor part of a bank, Hub24 focuses entirely on connecting advisors to a broad range of investment solutions for their clients. Discover why other advisors think Hub24 are the best in the market and access the benefits of choice and efficiency for you and your clients with their market-leading managed portfolio solution. To find out more, visit hub24.com.au. G'day everyone, Clayton here from XY Advisor, chatting with Andrew from Coredata. How are you, mate?
Yeah, very well.
Excellent. So we were just having a really brief conversation then about some of the things that you think are important trends in financial services. And I got to say, your answer was probably more in-depth and well-researched than most of the answers I get. So at that stage, I was like, wait, hold, because we're going to have to start again. So we spoke about three different things. And so I think the first one was, well, actually, probably the last one we're speaking about, but I think had several arms to it, was the fact that the baby boomers are essentially all but hit drawdown phase, or call it age 55.
They're in the last part of their savings phase, but it's the smallest part that in the last phase. If you think about the baby boomers as a curve post-war, which ran from 49 to 64, you've got to remember that all those titles that exist, baby boomers, Gen Y, Gen X, Gen Z, they're not really good demographic titles. They're mostly psychographic titles, and they weren't really done by researchers. They were mostly done by journalists. Gen X, for example, is a name which comes from a man called Douglas Coupland, who is a journalist who wrote a book about it.
Yeah, right.
Gen Y, Gen Z, same things. They came from journalists, and they're intergenerational titles used to describe behaviours. Baby boomers are a demographic lump because there was literally a baby boom after the war. Now, baby boomers had two other significant advantages over everybody else. First is that most of the labour, the skilled labour that they were replacing, was killed in the Second World War, so they were able to reprice labour.
Wow.
And the effective repricing labour also repriced capital assets. And the most common one of those is your house. So housing got repriced during that time because people could choose to invest in their house and spend on their house and do those types of things. And there's been some beneficial tax treatments of that asset which have made it attractive and made it a great way to store money. So, and Australians in particular are good owners and buyers of houses, Australians, New Zealanders, not so much in other countries. The really interesting part about that is you're right, the youngest of those, the people who were born in 64, are now turning 55. We've got kind of 3 months left of those people turning 55. And what we know from all the research we've done over the past 20 years, at 55, savings behaviour starts to change. We call this the sprint to retirement. And so people start to really, really push into retirement and start to think about it. Consumers suffer, most consumers, about 80% of consumers, suffer from this thing called temporal dissonance. If a problem is far away, we don't really consider it. But if you're 55, retirement is real. If you're 55, the first parts of your body are breaking down. Remember, most people don't retire because they choose to retire. Most people actually retire for health reasons. That's the most common reason, right? So all of a sudden you're 55. I'm 55. I'm the youngest of the baby boomers. My back's hurting. My knees are hurting. I can't run on cement anymore. I have to run on the soft sand.
Mate, you're not slowing down anytime soon. I can tell.
There's a kind of intellectual drive behind that. But all of a sudden I have to now think about retirement and think about the kind of end of work and what that looks like. This is kind of the last third of your working life. You have your first third where you're building your skills and you're choosing your career and your boss. Your second third where you're really building your career. And your last third of your career is you're kind of managing your way out to the next cycle and into retirement. And if you can choose to have that active, you're lucky, but most people, that's a kind of passive event. So all of a sudden, this is a big deal. But if you think about that curve slightly differently, the vast bulk of the baby boomers are probably in their 60s now. So this is very real. The most common birthday in England, for example, this year is 70. So the most commonly occurring birthday.
No way.
Yeah. So it's really interesting. So if you want to make money, invest in birthday cards for 70-year-olds. But think about what that does to the economy in terms of what the money's doing.
Yeah.
So the thing that we've got to think of, if you're a financial planner in Australia now, your skills are going to become really important because there's three things that are going to happen. One is that people are going from earning to saving, and saving well structurally to the right products, into the right asset classes, etc. That's a skill. Most people don't have it. They need help. The second group, the people who are 65, they've moved into drawdown. Doing that well is really important. And if you're 70, you're starting to think about, well, passing the asset on. And the three big fears of the people passing the asset on is that they've structured it improperly. They give too much money to the government.
Yeah.
There's an improper distribution. Someone who they don't like or don't understand well gets the money.
Yep.
They shouldn't have the money, or they get a lump sum, and it's really dumb to give person X or person Y a lump sum. And the third one is that an improper purchase is made, is that someone buys a Ferrari and sticks it in the driveway of their flat instead of buying the flat and sticking the Toyota Corolla in the driveway.
Dare you call a Ferrari an improper purchase?
Well, as a lover of German cars, I don't see the Italians as great. Although the Italian designs of the 1960s, particularly the early Ferraris, were absolutely beautiful. But I think they lost their way in the 80s. The Magnum PI Ferrari was possibly the last great car.
Oh, mate. So I got to dive into why you understand this so well. So you used to work at AMP. You're now CEO at Coredata, and all this stuff. It's just rattling off your.
So let me tell you a little bit about the kind of my background. I started out wanting to write about economics. I love economics. I love behavioural economics. I act and consider myself a behavioural economist.
Right.
That title is as meaningful as the title juggler or magician. It's not particularly powerful. It's kind of a group noun, which is not particularly powerful. But I'm really into it, right? I've done a lot of research and I read about it. It's not just my job, but my hobby.
Well,
I started Coredata 20 years ago next February.
Wow.
Yeah. And so what Coredata does is it tries to understand the gap between the consumer needs and the manufacturer's needs.
Right.
So that's our whole job. Our whole job is to understand the difference between those two things. Because for a long time, when I worked at AMP, I spent sort of a decade there in marketing and product management and those things. And it was an odd place for an economist to be, but I quite enjoyed it. I was completely aware that we really had no clue of what the customer wanted or was doing. We were simply making things, throwing them over the wall and see what we could sell.
Seeing what sticks.
Yeah. And so literally it cost about $100,000 a time to build a product, and we would be doing about 8 or 10 a year and just throwing them at the wall. Some would work, some would.
Yeah,
chaos, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think things have improved somewhat since then. I certainly hope they have. But the kind of interesting thing is that I constantly understood that the customer was very opaque to the manufacturer.
Right.
The moment that I walked through the doors of 33 Alfred Street, which is the Circular Quay building, the rest of the world ceased to exist, and AMP only thought about itself rather than about the customer needs. Right. I think those things have changed, but that's true everywhere. I worked prior to that. I did 4 years at Rothschild Asset Management.
Yeah, right.
And working in a much more technical role. But the point was that the same things are true. So I really wanted to understand this from the customer's perspective. So that's our entire job. I'm by nature a big data guy. So we built inside Coredata, not just the research skills, and we're kind of first to get on the cloud, first to understand all those things, and first to move into that space. Everyone's since followed us there, but we're ahead of them in some other ways. But we built up a big database.
Yeah, right.
151,000 mass affluent and high net worth Australians in our database.
How? What's the methodology?
Well, we've built an online magazine.
Right.
Called Hunter and Bly.
Yeah,
so we can constantly stimulate them through that. And so we give away every quarter a prize, travel prizes generally, or alcohol prizes, and we write about that. So that's hunterandbly.com.au.
Cool.
And that builds a live network and community. The second thing is that we have, via the research that we've done, a big database of financial professionals in Australia, about 24,000 financial planners, 10,000 accountants, similar number of mortgage brokers.
Whoa.
And again, we're constantly stimulating them and talking with them, and we have an online magazine called New Model Advisor where we publish our research.
Yes.
So our entire goal is to understand consumers and help financial services businesses grow.
Wow.
So that's our gig, right? It's to be growth partners for financial services businesses.
Yeah.
And growth can mean a bunch of things. It can mean increased profits. It can mean increased customer numbers. Or it can mean increased customer satisfaction. The powerful word in our kind of motto, which is growth partnerships, is important because growth is full of meaning. You describe growth, and we describe what partnership is, how we help. If we don't help you achieve that, you sack us. That's it. Go on. Thanks very much. See you later.
That's a very, very interesting job you've created for yourself.
Yeah, look, It was a kind of a burning need, and I could see it when I was at AMP. And when I started the business, my first customer was AMP.
Yeah.
So we have a constant feed of data from surveys, constant feed of data from mystery shopping. We push people through the process of buying financial services all the time.
Wait, financial services as in you get people to go to financial planners?
Yeah.
Wow. So ASIC does mystery shopping,
Yeah.
but you guys do mystery shopping.
We don't do the
well.
ASIC mystery shopping. Ours is different because we think slightly differently about it. I very much admire ASIC's mystery shopping because they can pull the plan at the back end. We can only ask the customers for it. And,
certainly.
And they often provide it to us. And we don't judge it in the same way as they do because markets you have to view with a kind of longitudinal lens. So if it's, this kind of debate whether it's the right advice or the wrong advice or whether it's perfect or not, it is inferential research. We need to have a look at how much they're being charged, what they're being charged for, do they understand what they're being charged for, and then whether or not the asset allocation is right. It's kind of ducks and drakes, right? You can argue with intolerances what's good or bad about that. Obviously, if there's something wrong, and you can clearly see it. But we do about 130 of those a year.
Wow.
So in the financial advice sector.
I had no idea.
Yeah, and also in the private banking sector as well.
Wow.
Yeah,
wait, do you guys pay for that?
We pay the consumer to do it.
Yeah.
And then we aggregate the data and sell the research.
Okay, so even if it costs, say, someone, especially in private banking, right? If someone's paying $10,000 for a piece of advice, you guys wear that?
No. So this is really interesting. So it depends. The answer is it depends.
Right.
It would rarely cost that sort of money for those sort of people. But what we do is we go to our database and find people who are actually looking for the service. So someone who's really wants to buy it, right? So we go out to 150,000 people,
right,
and say,
hey, if you're getting advice, why don't you
get paid to do it?
Paid to do it. Oh, that's a pretty good model.
You learn about $1,500 from us if you do it, right?
Fantastic.
So if we're doing, at the moment we're doing 120, so that's going to cost us about $200,000.
Goodness gracious.
Yeah, to actually do all the research, and then there's the cost of running the research and doing
of course.
All those types of things.
I consulted at Advisor Ratings just on the marketing side, but seeing the data people working, I know it was a lot of work. Really smart people working very long hours.
They've got a big hill in front of them. They don't yet have the database. Whereas we've spent the last 20 years building that database.
Yeah.
And we've got 20 years of linear data. It's all in our data lake.
Oh, the longitudinal, is that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've got 20 years of research in a giant data lake.
Christ almighty.
So even now when people say we need to do some research, then you don't really need to do the research. We did this in April, right?
Yeah. So. Man, that's super interesting. So one of the things that we were speaking about before we turned the mics on, I think we definitely need to speak about it, is the fact that as the big end of town have left advice, you've got a bunch of people that are now unadvised, but they're unaware that they're unadvised.
This has happened in two areas. It's happened in advice and also inside insurance. There's people inside superannuation, particularly where the compulsory insurances have been turned off and the multiple insurances have been turned off, and the insurance companies, the superannuation companies have done everything they can in terms of writing to people and contacting them and saying, because I'm in the business of understanding this, for example, I've got multiple superannuation accounts because I want to see what they're doing, how they're communicating,
wow,
et cetera.
Interesting.
So I run industry funds, I run retail funds, and I run all the neo businesses I've got relationships with because I want to see how they communicate with me. And then I can benchmark them and then I can see what's going on.
Awesome.
So of course they wrote to me and said, we're turning off your insurance, et cetera, et cetera. And I observed how it did, and I made some choices and did my insurances. But I was also really clear of going out to our network and saying, have you been communicated with? And they say, no, I haven't heard from anyone. And we know that's not true, right?
Yeah.
Because we could know in that database, well, person X is with Australian Super, and I've seen the Australian Super letters. I know they've gone out. So they haven't read it or whatever. And so they don't know that they're not insured anymore. And that's really problematic. It's more interesting and challenging, not just in the Australian super insurance world, where they have kind of the blancmange of all Australians, but in businesses like CBUS or Mine Super, where people are in dangerous industries. where people commonly have injuries. Things like Club Plus or Host Plus, where people cut their hands and et cetera, people kitchen workers. So those guys should be insured. And they did in the end up getting a carve out. But understanding what those insurances are and how they act is really important to those businesses.
Yeah.
So the second part of that is that, as you know, BT Advice is gone, parts of CBA are closing down, other businesses are shutting down, et cetera, et cetera. And they're, of course, communicating with their their advised customers as well as they can. Either by phone or by letter, and telling them that they're no longer advised. But that's not a perfect process. And the really interesting part about that, and I'm not going to name the company because it's slightly unfair, is that I was a customer of one of those companies that closed down. And the guy who was my advisor simply rang up and said, "You've probably heard that we're shutting down. I don't know what this means. I may be moving to company X or company Y, or I may not." And that was the last I ever heard of him.
This is your actual financial planner.
My actual financial planner
had to give you that call.
Gave me that call, and no one has communicated with me. They've still got my money. I don't know who's managing it, how it's being managed.
Stop it.
No.
Holy damn.
So I'm a previously advised customer of Bank X.
Yes.
With X dollars in there, not an insubstantial sum because I'm kind of an old guy. And I'm going to have to figure out where this is going.
And how many of these people like yourself do you think are out there?
About 500,000.
500,000.
Yeah.
So from an advisor point of view, they're listening going, okay, so you're telling me that there are 500,000 people that are used to having a financial planner that now no longer have a financial planner.
Yeah, no, I've gone and found one, and it's a painful process.
Sure, but you have, but the majority of people aren't.
Exactly.
So here's the money question. How do advisors find those 500,000 people?
The really interesting challenge is that there's not actually an easy way to do it because the businesses don't have a good plan for this. And there's some of this is naturally occurring, right? Say your AMP, you've got people retiring all the time, so those people go into a pool and they should be allocated out, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
And all the banks are the same choice. 2 of the banks have shut their practices down. One of the banks has changed the ownership structure of who it's gone to, so it's now owned by somebody else.
Yep.
All of that means flux and change, and communication to that flux and change is really important. Now, if you're poorly communicated with, and there's a lot of people who are very poorly communicated with me, you start to think, well, I'm going somewhere else. So now I have to choose someone. So there's a really interesting piece that we're doing now, and the mystery shopping that we're doing now is showing that people aren't actually easy to choose. Consumers are concerned about the future. They're very worried about the future. They're not a blank slate. They're not what the psychologists would call a tabula rasa. They actually come to this with ideas. They come to it with a history of a poor experience. This is not good. They're transferring some of that threat and fear onto the new advisor, and they're looking for, in the main, a fair amount of hand-holding in the first meeting. At the moment, it's difficult to make appointments. People are busy. It's taking up to 2 weeks to actually get face-to-face with people.
Yeah.
Which is, you don't feel particularly loved if you're asking a girl for a date and she says, yeah, I can see you in November. Not joking. People are trying to make appointments this week and being told we can't see you till November 14.
Yeah, crazy.
And everyone's going, well, forget it. I'm going to find someone else.
And especially if, like you say, in the situation you were in before you found another advisor, it's like, well, I'd like to talk to you, but I can't even talk to you. You know, from the advisor's point of view, right? And from the client's point of view, it's, well, where do I book my meeting if I can't even get? If you don't know where you're going, then I certainly don't know where you're going.
So yeah, and the thinking is, did I want to stay with the person, the advisor that I was with? I probably did, because he knew the history and he was actually reasonably good to deal with. The person I really wanted to stay with was his office manager, who was fantastic. He'd ring her up, he'd say, I need to do A, B, C, and D.
Yeah.
She would do it, she'd send you a note, it's done. Fantastic. This is the person who was actually changing my life.
I tell you what would be a really good marketing effort would be to promote yourself as the new home for former clients of the big banks.
Yeah, there's a really interesting challenge in that, because then the range is so diverse. And so if you would take even Westpac, for example, a business that I really liked in history,
yep,
both their private banking advice has disappeared and their BT advice has disappeared. Some of it's gone to Viridian, but a lot of it's gone kind of nowhere.
That's so nuts.
It's interesting, isn't it? Imagine if that was a lease or a mortgage.
Or just any professional service, any group of clients in any field.
It strikes me that ASIC was shocked by that there wasn't a plan for these people. That they were like, what do you mean there's no plan?
Yeah.
Maybe that's not the case. Maybe this is what they... But, I mean, for a bunch of these people, the advice is really important. So let's be really clear. A lot of our research shows that advice adds value, and we can really give you the proofs on advice adding value. And we think the advisor's alpha is mostly about comfort and planning and doing all those types of things. But mathematically, it looks like to us it's about 3% compounding a year.
Do you have some sort of research on that? Do you have a document someone can download to have a look at that?
Well, it's owned by other people,
sure,
because they've paid us to do the research.
So
it's
for
not
example,
our data.
Russell, I know, has their value of advice, and they've got their. Are you
so
involved
Vanguard
in that?
has Advisors Alpha.
Yes.
Russell has it. So we've done the work for the Vanguard in the US.
Right.
So we're not just Australia. We're US, UK, Australia, and Asia.
Jesus Christ! How did I score this interview?
You rang up and asked. And we're just around the corner.
Thank God.
So we're doing that around the world. National Australia Bank is doing a lot of work in that space. They understand it really well, and they're understanding how to sort of make their offer so that they provide the most value to the most clients. And that's on a spectrum. So if you think of everyone from your My Super client, someone who has the most basic needs, to someone who has really complex needs, which is structural, intergenerational, and otherwise. And you've got to be able to meet them in each of those areas. And that's really important.
Another thing that we spoke about previously, and I thought was really interesting, is trust in advice.
Yeah.
Right, before and after Royal Commission, and how it's slowly, but actually no, you didn't say slowly, how it's rapidly getting back to it. So can we cover what it was like before the Royal Commission, then after, and then where it's going?
So trust is a complex psychological phenomena which only exists in humans. So it exists in kind of two parts of your brain. We're the only animal which actually stores up behavior, which is what trust is.
Not even the other great apes?
No. They all work in dominance hierarchies.
Ah.
So you've got to understand dominance hierarchies and trusts are really different.
Right.
So they don't work the same. And we're the only animal that has it. And we can take a picture of where trust lives, and it lives in your prefrontal cortex. So we're the only animal with a prefrontal cortex.
Understood, yeah.
So every action which passes through your brain passes through the prefrontal cortex, and that attaches an emotion to the action. Yes. And it also stores it up. We're also the only animal which really does a thing called revenge, which is the dark side of trust, right?
Come on, surely other animals get revenge.
They don't do revenge. They don't store up behavior. They have a dominance hierarchy, but not stored behavior, and it lives in a part of your brain called the caudate nucleus, which is a little almond shaped.
Yeah, I'm definitely not going to argue, considering you know where it's stored in there.
Well, so understanding this is really important, and a trust construct is pretty easy to understand. There's 200 years of research on this.
Wow.
So the first thing that you need to think of is that the most powerful driver of trust is a thing called benevolence, which is this person acting in my best interest?
Right.
Do they act for me? Then there's the thing called authenticity. Are they who they say they are? Then there's predictability. How does this person behave under pressure?
Oh, okay. So it's not just what they say they were going to do. It's under adverse environments.
Under adverse environments, how are they going to act? Do they go to water? Do they all those types of things?
Right. So
understanding the kind of algorithmic nature of trust, which is really important to understand. So you've got to meet those things all the time. So you've got to be benevolent. You've got to be competent. You've got to be able to do what you say you're going to do. Mm-hmm. And often confidence and competence are mistaken for each other. Very confident people, it's like a shortcut to competence, but it's not always true. Particularly in men. Men are more confident than they're often.
Risk takers, right?
Well, they figure I can solve this, so I'll fix this. Give them, and then there's authenticity and predictability, and they're the sort of drivers. And then there's self-interest.
Yep.
So self-interest is a really big driver, and then there's a kind of time factor. So we understand trust research really well, and we've done a lot of work and kind of academic work in this space. So we've built a series of models, and what you're always trying to do is take kind of an algorithmic structure and generate a number, an integer for this, a simple number. So there's kind of a long questionnaire, but it gives you a reliable trust indicator. So we do that for government, for mortgage brokers, for real estate, for accountants, for financial planners, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. So because you guys understand this concept of trust so well, the quality of your research is therefore high.
Yeah, look, everyone thinks it's kind of amazing, but I'm confident in saying to people, this is not our idea, right? We didn't invent this.
Oh, understood. Yeah,
So, this has been done in the 1950s brilliantly in America.
But at least you're aware of that framework and you're using that framework rather than just pulling questions out of thin air.
No, exactly. And so so I presented it recently, and a guy came up to me and said, a whole survey, and a guy came up to me and said, you should patent this. And I said, mate, this was done by Walter Mischel in 1950. It's not my idea, right?
Right, yeah.
So you should still do it. I can't. It's literally someone else's idea. And anybody who knows anything about this will recognise the author of this survey as this guy from America. Right. So I just repeated the survey. And there's better work done by Philip Zinvio and the guys who did the Stanford prison experiment, all those kind of things. Yeah, so understanding that, and the work that Stanley Milgram did, they're all much better than me. I'm sort of just standing on their feet, right? Taking. But repeating the work is important. So prior to the Royal Commission, we, like everybody else, saw the Royal Commission coming. This is coming, right? We've failed to self-regulate. You can't get away from this now. There's too many bodies in the street. This is going to happen. So we started doing a quarterly trust survey in a whole bunch of sectors of the Australian market. And if you want a copy of the research, I'll give you a copy of the output data and you can circulate it to anyone.
That'd be amazing.
Yep. So if we break it up in segments, so what happens is that we started to look at this. And prior to the Royal Commission, financial planning, banking and superannuation had very high trust scores. Superannuation's the highest, so the 0.75 or 75%. Banking was about 0.66 and financial planning about 0.6. So if you understand that as kind of 0 to 10 being the kind of trust score ratios, no one ever has a perfect 10, but plenty of people have 0 or negative numbers. It's an interesting way to understand it. A 6 out of 10 is really good. It's a fantastic number. So financial planning was in good shape.
Okay, so 6 out of 10 is considered
standard. It's like an NPS score, right? So at 6, that's fine. It's trusted.
Yeah.
The moment of the Royal Commission, it went to 0.3 to 3.
Right.
Which is really bad, right? Everyone's a detractor. No one wants to be with you.
Right.
Since that time, it's been steadily recovering. So banking went down from sort of 6 to 3 and is back to about 5. Financial planning's back at 0.41.
Okay.
So it's recovering quite rapidly. And at the current rate, if it keeps carrying at the current quarterly rate, it'll be back to 0.6 within another year. So it'll have completely recovered.
Yeah, right.
So it's a really interesting thing which is going on, partly because people realise that it was overdone and partly that there have been some substantial changes in the marketplace.
What are the things... So I think the full name was the Royal Commission into Banking and Financial Services Misconduct. I think that was the full name.
That's right.
And the thing that really annoyed me about what ended up happening is you had the close of the Royal Commission, bank stocks go up, and then essentially somehow, not even somehow, almost predictably, all the, call it the shit, landed at the feet of financial planners. Which I thought was super unfair.
Markets, there's a kind of interesting understanding of the way in which market works. You can either accept a perfect market hypothesis or reject it, right? But there are some people at the moment who are rejecting the pricing of Australian financial services stocks at their low levels. Those people who are rejecting it aren't in Australia. They're in the US, the UK and Asia. They're the ones buying the stocks because they think that they've been oversold. They think, because I've been to see these guys, they think they're as much as 40% mispriced. And they think if they invest now, they're going to have a 40% price reversion to what the price should be.
Interesting. Okay, so you're basically what you're saying is just because there was an effect, an immediate effect directly after the closing of the Royal Commission, it doesn't necessarily reflect sentiment. It reflects international, say, technical trading.
Well, no, there's a couple of things. So if you take the UK example, they had RDR ahead of us, and they had pension mis-selling and a whole bunch of other mis-selling scandals, and the prices and the businesses there got absolutely smashed.
Yes.
They halved in value overnight. They will have repriced to where they should be, where they should be in terms of an earnings multiple and a future earnings multiple, probably by this year. So it's going to take about 5 years. So the Americans and the Europeans think the same thing will happen in Australia.
Touché.
The listed stocks will return to their proper value, or they'll take this kind of fear discount off them, which is what this is, and they will be properly priced. Now, if you can get a 40% uplift over 4 to 5 years in a really low inflation market environment where not many stocks will be doing that.
Blue chip as well.
Yeah, that's a really good chance of actually repricing.
That's a good point.
So I know now people who own financial services businesses who are getting approaches from businesses overseas saying, we'll pay 10 times.
10 times what?
10 times current earnings.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Is this this is non-listed?
Non-listed.
Okay.
Private equity deal.
That's, yeah. And are they saying sure?
No. The
Oh.
ones that I know are doing it, saying, we'd like to talk to you. And I'm not going to break any confidences
No,
because
no,
I know
no,
these
of
people
course.
really well. We're actually in acquisition stage because we just bought a business for 1.2 times.
Yeah, right.
And we're buying other businesses for 1 times, and we're in a growth path at this stage. So why don't you come and see us in 2025 when we've hit our growth?
This is fantastic because from an advisor's point of view, there's a lot of bad sentiment in the market. And what's interesting is to hear about all the other stakeholders in the ecosystem are actually bullish. And it makes sense.
Well, this is not true for everyone, right?
Okay.
So if you want to sit down and think about Australian financial services companies and do what Carl Linnaeus did in the 1600s and divide them up into segments. And so, you know how he did the kingdom, phylum, order, genus, species one? We've divided them up into foxes, oxes, islanders, and cruisers. A fox is a well-run small business, mostly on the cloud, good business plans, good succession planning, good growth plans, really clear charging structures, engaged clients, but little and growing fast. An ox business is the same, but tends to have up to 20 ARs and probably 6 partners. Where the tension in those businesses, they tend to have some young partners and some old partners. Young partners are trying to drive value into the business. Old partners are trying to drive value out of the business. But they're really well-run professional businesses. Those are the ones that are attracting the buyers. An islander tends to be a person who's by themselves, who really runs one product, probably came from a life insurance background, isn't really compliant, really makes most of its money from its rebates from its product managers, and exists on that. So if you took the AMP example, there's two big payments they might get a year, one of 200,000, one of 50,000. That's really the profit that they're getting out of their business. That's what they're pulling out for themselves.
Yes.
And that's gone, right? That income is gone in the future.
Yeah.
Cruises are the same. Cruises, we noted when we were doing the research, are people who, I'm not sure how to think about this, who tend to work 2 to 3 days a week. I met a guy yesterday who is running a practice. Loves golf up in the Central Coast. This guy in particular loves surfing.
Cool.
So it doesn't work Monday, doesn't work Friday.
Legend.
Yeah, legend. Having a great time. Lives on acreage up north of Newcastle.
Stop it.
Yeah, right. Great time. Beautiful car.
Yeah.
He and his wife work in the business. They work Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. But they charge Monday to Friday, right? That's what they're charging their client for. And the client has that expectation.
Understood.
And they do 60 days of holidays overseas a year. The islanders and the cruisers who are living on those businesses, and they're not necessarily bad financial planners, but they're not doing what they say they should be doing.
Understood, yeah.
And they're the people that will be driven out of the market. Those businesses have no value.
Right.
They literally will be being sold for 1 times earnings, and they'll only ever be sold for 1 times earnings. Because when we do the research on their client engagement research, which we do every year, there's no engagement.
Right.
There's a small number that they're close to, but the vast bulk of them,
no idea.
Which is a shame. So they won't have those attractive multiples being paid to them. But the people the guy I spoke to had a 10 times earnings has got a really tight business and is growing really well. His clients really love him. They understand the offer. He only charges them a fee for service.
Yeah.
There's no platform fee and a fee for service, and that's it.
So I know a few advisors that do this. That we just call it sort of the new evolution of advice, right? So the advisors sort of see it as any product cost is almost like it's almost their responsibility to reduce product cost as much as possible, and then you can even just at the first year of advice say, hey, look, this is how much we've reduced for you in ongoing product costs. Don't receive any commission, whether investment, super, or even insurance. Just charge flat fee for service. And so are you saying that those businesses that do that have a higher value
much higher multiple? Yeah.
Hey, that's really good news. See, I had no idea about that.
Well, I mean, it's simply from the buyer's perspective because they find that easy to understand. They know it's compliant and they understand the future of those businesses really clearly.
And I've been thinking a lot about this actually, as to why is it that advisors find it easier to tell someone that they have, say, a $10,000 product fee than it is for advisors to say you have a $5,000 product fee and a $5,000 advice fee. I've been thinking about it more and more and more, and it's almost like advisors were trained to say or to feel that by saying you're personally not receiving the money, but some other company is, that it's easier. But I actually don't think it is.
I think you need to think about this, and I think you're thinking about this the right way, but if you think about this in a couple of ways, there's a lot of people that came into the advice industry from a sales and product background. So those people find it easy to articulate product benefit, whereas people who come into it from a structural background, maybe they were an ex-accountant, maybe they're an ex-banker, maybe whatever, they actually want to understand this from a skills, behavioural background.
Yeah.
So where people add the greatest value, and the greatest value of research really always comes out to people get higher peace of mind if they understand their future. Don't have to necessarily be rich. They need to understand what the future looks like. And that's what the advisor really does for them. That's what people are really paying for. So there's generally a big upfront cost to that because it takes a lot of time to get the plan right. But then there's a low ongoing cost. Our cycle shows that resets every 3 years. That there is effectively a big cost every 3 years.
So are you saying, as a general rule, advisors should be re-examining a plan every 3 years? Deeply
every 3 years.
Really?
Lightly every quarter.
Interesting, because whenever I think of sort of like a 10-year roadmap, I think, okay, Andrew, you're my client, and we're going to do this, and this over the next decade. But you're saying maybe we're going to do this. At this point, things will have changed.
So we did an experiment 2 years ago where we got people we looked at the survivability bias inside client books. And then we went to had a look at our 19-year piece of linear data. It was 16 years in that time, and had a look at the refresh and change rate inside people's lives, and it tends to be every 3 years. Literally, if you have to talk to a customer and come in after 3 years of engaging them and say, "Hey, we really need to talk. Things have changed," the customer in 80% of times will say, "Yeah, things have changed. We do need to talk."
Wow. So that sort of shortcut that's in some licensees that says, just ask the question, has your situation changed in the last 12 months as a part of an annual review? And 90% of the time they just tick no, so they don't have to do anything. You're suggesting that that's probably very incorrect.
Well, on a 12-month cycle, things don't change significantly. But if you think about someone who goes from that sort of 35-year-old to the 55-year-old, let's say they have kids who enter school when they're 35. So they enter primary school, which is not a particularly expensive period of time. High school's expensive. So we need to talk about that, right? We need to talk about that. And that could be a 12-year cycle if you've got 3 kids where you actually have to manage the cost of raising those kids. Then they go to the university stage, and that's less expensive, but the needs are slightly different. And then let's say they go the post-university stage. And one of the things that happens when people are post-university is that people get a lot of income back, because they're not paying for the kids anymore. The kids are earning their own money.
Right.
So big cost phase, low cost phase. So unless you've got a good advisor, you might spend that new income. You should be saving that.
Yeah.
So you should be saying, well, okay, your children are out of university now. You're literally getting, let's say it's 3 kids, you're getting $28,000 in the hand back now that you were previously spending on the kids. What are we going to do with that? Are we going to put that in super? That's a great place for some of it. Are we going to be buying other investments? That's a great place for some of it.
The 1980s Ferrari?
Well, look, I'm a Porsche man.
And that's like German, yeah.
Yeah, I like the 1987 wide-bodied 3.2-litre horizontally opposed air-cooled 6-cylinder. I like to bash my knuckles on it.
Awesome.
But I also know I've got a few investments. Pound for pound, that has been my most successful investment. That has been my Macquarie Bank of investments. I bought it for X $1,000 and it's tripled in value.
No.
Absolutely.
That is...
in the time that I've held it. To the point where I'm thinking about selling it, because I was like, if someone's going to give me that much for it, they can have it.
Oh, man. I've never heard such an appreciating asset be appreciated so much.
Well, I like driving it, but I'd also like to have the money that it's worth.
Yeah, fair play.
So, they just don't make those cars anymore. And I was having this conversation with a friend. I think I'm the last generation that appreciates it. The generation behind me doesn't care about old, oily Porsches.
No. So I'm 36, and and my first car was a 1970 something Toyota Corona, and I started
The butter box?
I never called it that, but it was very boxy looking.
Yeah, that was called the butter box.
Oh, was it? There you go.
The 1.8 litre. I mean, I know my cars.
That's awesome, man. It was aqua as well. It was crazy.
Man. It's Nippon Blue.
Actually, that was the name of it.
Yeah, that's the colour.
Oh my god!
I know all this stuff, man. I'm a weirdo.
That is awesome. So I moved to Sydney like about 8 years ago, and all I had at the time was a motorbike. Also, I was single, so you have a motorbike.
Motorbikes are fantastic, mate. You've got to have at least 3 in your life.
That's a good point. And then I met Vera down here. We've since married. And for the last handful of years, I've just had no vehicle, right? So I live sort of in the city, but you're definitely right in that car ownership and sort of owning things, I think, is probably one of the big differences between you call it a psychographic, between baby boomers and I dare call myself a millennial because, I'm technically in those barriers, but I'm wearing something rather flannelly today, which is rather Gen X-y. But yeah, so we're after experiences. The baby boomers are more likely to be in ownership.
So I love my cars, right? I'm a car guy. I grew up on a farm in rural Victoria. I got my first car when I was 11. Morris 1100, 1964 porcelain green horizontally opposed engine. It's a great car. The first thing I did was just pull the engine out and rebuild it.
Dude, that is so awesome.
Yeah. I could rebuild that engine, the Holden 186 and the Holden 202 and possibly the VW engine blindfolded because I've rebuilt them so many times.
Oh,
literally know where everything is.
My God.
But the new cars, you open up the bonnet and there's a plastic sheet over it which says in German, "Don't touch this."
Yeah.
So
and the Tesla as well, right? There's basically you got 2 axles and a battery.
Fun to drive. But in the last 2 trips, I recently had to do a trip to Canada for work, and I hired a 5-litre V8 2018 Mustang.
Stop it.
Mentalist. It was a ridiculous car. It came with a dragway setting.
What does that even mean?
It means you can lock up the front brakes, get the back wheels to spin, and press a button, and it launches.
They let people hire these?
Yeah. So
do you have to do a driving test to prove?
What's even funnier is that I get to Canada and I'm renting it, right? So I'm just talking to the guy, and he said, "Oh, you're the last person to rent this car." I said, "What does that mean?" He said, "Oh, it's a turnback car. After you rent it, we rebuild it and sell it." And I'm looking at this guy who's called Richard, and he said, "Should I sell you the full insurance?" I said, "I think you should." I think you should sell me the full insurance.
You shouldn't have told me that.
Right. So I flogged this thing. Well, I went into the distant backwoods of Canada and just saw how fast I could make this thing go.
How fast did you go?
Well, I've kind of ran out of nerves at about 200 k's an hour. It wasn't actually very well balanced. I was on this thing called the Sea to Sky Highway, and a Porsche 987 passed me, and I thought, right, I'm going to have you. So I pulled out to chase him. Couldn't get anywhere near him because I just couldn't hold the curves.
Yeah.
But 2 weeks ago, I went to a conference in Japan.
Yeah.
In Japan, I rented a 1987 R32 Skyline.
Oh, yes.
180 k's in third gear.
Oh, damn.
What's even more interesting is the Japanese police seem not really to care about speeding.
What do you mean?
So I'm going with the traffic under a tunnel. There's tunnels everywhere on the road to Mount Fuji.
Right.
Doing 140. It's marked 80, but I'm just keeping up with the traffic. And a policeman comes drifting past me, doing about 160. Didn't even pay any attention to me. And I eventually spoke to, because I'm quite a history guy, right? So I get a guide in every city. I spoke to the local guide and said, "What's going on with the car laws?" And he said, "Oh yeah, speeding's not really a thing here. We don't really care about it. If it's stolen or something like that, we really care about it. But it's kind of whatever." So there's all these toll booths all through the way through Japan because there's lots of toll booths. So I turned every toll booth into a Grand Prix star. See how fast I could get to 200 k's.
Mate, that is so cool.
So I tried to drift it, but I couldn't until I got back. And then someone pointed out, because they're 4-wheel drive. And they said, you have to turn that off. I'm like, oh, right. Yeah, well, I missed that one.
Mate, that is so cool. So do you do any work specifically with advice and advisors, or is it all mostly product?
No.
Okay.
So we focus on sort of big customer insights, but over the past 4 or 5 years, we've been working with advice businesses kind of intimately, building their offer, building their structure, building their pricing models, and doing...
As like a consulting?
Yeah,
offer?
kind of as a consulting, often for the licensee,
Okay, that makes more sense.
And doing it at that level and working there, but occasionally with businesses, we're really open to it.
Yeah,
and
cool.
we really get involved and get kind of deep into it. There are better businesses than us than doing it. We work at a structural level because I'll be candid. Writing the business plan is one thing, but it's the discipline of following it, which is the gritty, grindy part, which makes the real difference. And someone has to be there every day doing that.
Yeah.
So, for example, inside Coredata, we've got the 100-day fitness challenge. If you do a half an hour's exercise and you have to take a photograph of yourself doing it,
really?
Yeah, and it's posted to this chat group that we've got, we'll reward you. There'll be sort of economic rewards inside the company. If you do half an hour's exercise a day, we'll pay you a bit more money.
That's crazy. Are you saying this is your employees?
Yeah.
Oh, you've got your own little, what is it, AIA Vitality going on.
Kind of, right? So there's 6 people who have signed up for it.
Yeah, cool.
We're in week 3.
Yeah.
And you have to, there's a couple, the challenge is that there's probably twice a week you have to do 2 a day. The people who are doing it in week 3 have already found substantial physical and mental changes.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's quite interesting, and who knew? But the challenge is it's keeping it going, right? Keeping it up, keeping it happening.
Yeah.
So we all know to lose weight, we've got to eat less and exercise more.
Yes.
Half an hour is really an hour really of exercise every day.
Whoa.
Fundamentally changes your life.
Yeah.
But it's grindy, right? You're hungover.
Oh, man.
Went to a conference in the Southern Highlands this week.
Yeah.
Drank too much champagne.
Ugh.
Well, free champagne. And what are you going to do? But then woke up at 5:15 and thought, well, I've got to do it because I've got to take a picture of me doing it. And I'm the boss, right?
Oh, no.
So that hour of exercise is brutal.
Oh.
But I did it and I felt great. So
Do you guys have like wrist things that track?
some of the guys do. I tend not to. I just say, so I live in a place which is close to a beach, and 2 laps of the beach is 3.2 kilometres. So you run that, 100 push-ups, 100 sit-ups, 100 squats, then around the boys for a swim and back in. That's a solid hour, right? And I try and do that every morning.
Oh, man.
So, but, and you take a photo. Here I am doing it. And this is, so I was taking a photo of the location. Everyone's going, yeah, but you might. So then I took a photo of myself covered in sweat. And they said, yeah, don't do that again.
Yeah, that's too much information.
Yeah, exactly. So you don't want to see that.
But so you do similar things for, so you put challenges to financial planners, do you?
Yeah, well, so we go in and we work with them and understanding their structure, how much. So the first thing we do is look at their customer book and get a really good understanding of that and what's going on. Right. And we do some research and understand what those customer drivers and sentiments are and understand what those things are and look at the gap between what's being provided and what's needed. And often there's a big gap. Yep. One of the most interesting gaps that we've found is the extra services that these people would like. Yep. And that's interesting.
When you say the extra services, you mean the clients?
The clients, yeah.
Well, right. So you go to their client base and say, hey, what else would you like your advisor to provide?
Yeah. So we've got
That's a good question.
A series of tools, right?
That's a really good question. Because I think there's so much there that advisors and the longer...
It's really simple. They just have a part in the questionnaire that says, would you like to hear from the advisor? Yes.
Yes.
It turns out that every time that someone does that, there's something else that they want, need, or a service that they require.
Yeah.
And you think, well, how long since you've heard from them? 2 years?
Yeah.
Right.
Right, yeah. Well, that's awesome, man. Look, I think we could chat forever. So let's book in, a couple of months from now. We'll do another one. But thank you so much for coming on. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
I learned heaps about, a lot of stuff, including, because I always wondered what Coredata did.
Yeah, we're terrible at marketing. It's literally our greatest. One of the things that we're really busy, which is excellent, good, right? But when I look at how our marketing capacity, we're actually not very good at it. Oh, well. And I watch people who are really good at it and think, yeah, but their work's garbage. And so that's kind of interesting.
I fully agree with that sentiment in general is to just solve the problem and be good, like deliver the value, and the marketing does itself. That's kind of my inner feeling, and then you just got to do some tweaking and some sprinkling over the top.
Well, it is. I mean, there's a kind of interesting part of that, and I think every advisor is possibly in the same thing. There's this tension between being the best business you can be for your clients, and being the best business owner you
Yeah,
can be.
definitely.
So what we did about 5 years ago is we set a series of metrics around this. So to be the best business that we can be,
Yep.
this is what our costs should be doing.
Yep.
This is what our top line growth should be doing.
Yep.
And this is what our customers should be saying about us. And we do these surveys to customers, so we know pretty clearly what they're saying about us. And if they fall outside of what people are saying about us, we go, well, what happened here?
Yeah.
And so sometimes we dig into it and we find out it's the client's fault. Well, that's ridiculous. That's unreasonable, right? That's
right.
It's insane to us for that. And sometimes we find out that we missed a deadline or we didn't communicate, and we think, well, that's fair. And then we go back and have a little PIR and sit down and say, how did that happen?
Yeah, the worst thing in business, I hate more than anything is failing and getting things wrong. Oh God, I hate it more than anything. But it's an unfortunate, and especially if people get annoyed at you because you did something wrong as well. It's like, it's just a massive dagger through the heart.
I mean, one of the things I say to my guys, and some people really get that dagger through the heart thing, and I will constantly go back to them and say, if it's, I don't know you particularly well, but if you were working for me and you had like one of those a year, say, well, look, you're doing 100 events a year.
Yeah.
One a year that's normal, right? If there was 10 a year or 15 a year, we'd be having a different conversation.
Yeah.
How you handle this is going to be the definition of you, not that you repeat it, right? So let's handle this well and do a good job and move forward that way. But if there's a repeated failure or if there's something happening. Yeah. So, for example, in our team, we've got a bunch of guys who just really love to please clients.
Excellent.
They bugger profitability.
Yeah.
So
that's why either, when you said it's like you got to be the best business owner and the best business deliverer as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but you've also, we've got one guy who's doing it, and we went back to the client and said, we're just not earning enough out of this. And they were horrified.
Yeah.
They were like, really? Well, we want to keep working with you. Well,
yeah, I know that feeling so well. Now, if there's any advisors that want to reach out to you or your company or anything like that, how do they get in touch?
Via the website, it's really easy. Just there's a whole bunch of places to go into coredata.com.au and just send us an email. And I'm really easy. I'm just Andrew@coredata.com.au and I'll respond.
Awesome, man. Thanks so much for coming on.
My absolute pleasure.
Cheers.
Thank you.